You're one of my favorite writers covering this strange moment we are in. And you had a new piece just dropped today. Is that what happens with new pieces? Do they drop? Is it like a new song? As a journalist, you say, I dropped a new piece today?
Only when we want to sound really cool.
I was going to say, try it.
I just dropped a new piece today.
Okay. Good. This is the audience for it, yes. Your new piece, Trump's followers are living in a dark fantasy. And I just read it. You talk about going to Trump rallies. I've been to 1,000 Trump rallies. And you've gone to them over the years. I'm curious what you've noticed recently and how, if you've noticed any sort of change.
Yeah, I think, what's really different about the rallies now, and I think, I think it's important to recognize, we're coming out of a difficult economic moment because of high inflation, because of the end of the pandemic. But what's happened is there is a sort of universe of unreality that they're living in which everything bad that is happening in America at this moment is the fault of immigrants and illegal immigration. Mm-hmm. And that is primarily because that's what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are telling them. And so they have this idea that, if Trump comes in, he's going to take all this money that's being spent on these illegal immigrants that, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are bringing in and spending all this money on. They're going to take that money and they're going to spend it on them instead. And that's really not what the agenda is. And so to me, I thought that was interesting.
Did you find was that different than what you noticed in 2016?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of comprehensive universe of unreality that these people are living in is distinct. And I think we saw how dangerous that kind of conspiratorial universe can be on January 6th in 2020. But if anything, it's only gotten worse. People are in a kind of conspiratorial bubble where they think that they are being victimized by things that are not happening. And this is not to say that people are not suffering from real economic hardships, but the reasons they're being given for those things are not the actual reasons.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about the three circles of the MAGA universe here. Did you notice it broken down in three kind of types of people who were becoming and are fervent Trump supporters?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the people who would staff a Trump administration, and they have a very specific policy agenda that I think is actually distinct from what a lot of the people who go to these rallies think is going to happen. Because when they go to these rallies, what Trump says, what his warm-up speakers say is that Harris and Biden are spending all this money on illegal immigrants, and your life is getting harder. But we're going to take all that money and we're going to spend it on you instead. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what their plan is. So I think there's a sort of the circle around Trump, his sort of policy advisors, his activists, those types of people, they understand what the actual policy agenda is, which is a very traditional policy agenda of redistributing income upward, of cutting healthcare, of shrinking the welfare state in order to cut taxes for the wealthy.
The ones who benefit primarily from it as well. That's like the Elon Musk live in that first circle.
Precisely. And there's this other circle, these people who are true believers, who show up to Trump rallies and they love Trump and they believe that he is fighting for them. And that when he deals with all these people they have been told are their enemies, they're going to have much easier lives. And then there's sort of, people I would describe as a sort of medium Republican voter who, they may not love Trump, but they are conservative. They're anti-abortion. Maybe they own a business. They want lower taxes. They have conservative principles, and they sort of are talking themselves into voting for Trump by dismissing the things that he has done, by saying, Jan 6, okay, fine, it was bad, but the media is exaggerating. Yeah, he says a lot of colorful things, but, politicians lie all the time. And they sort of rationalize, what Trump is, who is he is a uniquely dangerous person. I don't think every Republican is like Trump. But they sort of dismiss this because they want to give themselves permission to vote for him anyway. And I think those are the three elements of what I would describe as the Trump coalition. And I think, tomorrow we're going to find out just how big those three circles are. Now,
you wrote a very influential and thoughtful piece called "The Cruelty Is the Point" in 2018. It sort of articulated this MAGA movement and people finding community around the cruelty that Trump espoused and some of his actions that wasn't a byproduct of conservative values, but sort of the cruelty was what people did rally around. We are We are now years past that. Have we become comfortable with that cruelty? How has that cruelty changed?
I think that, one of the attack lines that the Harris campaign has been using has been saying, oh, well, people leave these Trump rallies early. And this sort of drives Trump insane. Now, to be clear, those people who are leaving, those are Trump superfans. The way someone else put it to me was like, people with season tickets leave games early too. So, these are people who really love Trump.
Well, yeah, but traditionally, those teams aren't winning very often either.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. But I think that, part of it is just that they're not totally there for him. I mean, what he gives them is permission to act out in ways that other people might judge them for in a space where it's okay to do that. In a space where it's okay to be cruel, it's okay to be, nasty about the people that you don't like or that you hate and fear. But I think that, a lot of time people are showing up because they want to be around other people who think like them. They want to feel less alone. And I think that's, that part of it is very human, and we're pretty much, we're all social animals. We're all like that. I think that, the problem is obviously that it's centered around this man who has authoritarian ambitions and is willing to create this sort of fictional universe in order to manipulate people into doing, justifying terrible things.
I think you talk a little bit in this most recent article about the MSG rally and the comedian who came on and told a joke that belittled Puerto Rico, called Puerto Rico garbage, and there was an uproar around this conversation. But I think what it was speaking to was what the sensibility in that room was, who he was appealing to. And I think as somebody who goes to so many of these rallies, there's a trolling sensibility there. The T-shirts that you see are as mean as possible. They're belittling Kamala Harris, calling her Joe and the Hoe was a big T-shirt that they had. Like, the idea of being a troll is celebrated there. That's part of the fun. There's an ecstasy in the cruelty that happens at these events.
Right. They get to say the things that people might judge them for saying if they said them at their workplace or among their friends, depending on who their friends are. But in this space, they get to say it, and Trump will encourage it, and they'll laugh at it, and everybody will have a good time. And so I just think that part of it certainly has not changed, but there is something different about the degree to which people are making decisions on the basis of things that simply are not happening. When you talk about there's sort of this conspiracy about Harris and Biden flying in undocumented immigrants from other countries in order to sign them up to vote. I mean, that's just not a thing that's happening. But they do not have any compunctions about telling people these things, because that's what justify, the sort of conspiratorial world that they've created justifies, some sort of radical action, like, say, trying to overturn an American election. Because after all, there are these shadowy elites who are trying to destroy, the world as you know it.
Do you know who those elites are?
Well, one of them is me, obviously. I'm obviously a part of the shadowy elite.
I knew it. You win people over when you say you drop an article and everybody thinks you're cool, and suddenly you have all that power.
And suddenly, I'm a member of the Illuminati.
You have another article that's in the most recent print edition of The Atlantic that talks about this Republican informant state, turning everybody into an informant. What is this snitch state that you're speaking to?
Well, I think, before Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was this Texas ban that was passed, and I live in Texas, I live in San Antonio, and this ban that was passed that was based on the idea that, if you you could file a lawsuit in court over someone aiding or abetting an abortion, and you could get $10,000 for that. Now, that is a law that sort of incentivizes snitching. It's a snitch law. And what we found is, like, laws in Texas and in other conservative states, I mean, you can look at Florida, they sort of incentivize this informing on people for things that conservatives think should not be acceptable. And whether that's, in some cases, you talk about school curriculums, or not just abortion, but discussing abortion. A law like that is not just about making sure people don't have abortions, but it's about making sure people don't discuss them, because you don't want somebody to sue you or sue someone you love on the basis of the fact that you, paid for the Uber that took them to the airport, that they then got on a plane and went to Colorado to get an abortion because they couldn't get basic health care in their home state. And especially a couple years ago, Abbott put out this executive order defining gender-affirming care for children as child abuse, which led to, people, it's one of the examples that was given to me was that a girl who was dressing in a gender non-conforming way, somebody, reported her, even though she wasn't even actually trans. She was just, wearing pants or something. And this is the kind of, this is the kind of environment that those laws create, where these laws incentivize people to snitch on their friends and neighbors, in the hopes of recreating stigmas that I think, are no longer in society in the way that they once were. Obviously, it was once very stigmatizing to have had an abortion. It was very, we're not that far off from where it was not all right to be out as a gay person in American society. Or, for example, we are not too far. I mean, it's been 4 years, but the racial justice protests that happened in 2020 brought out a lot of ideas that some people would rather not discuss and would rather be shoved, back into the dark. And so what you can do is you can't necessarily argue people out of believing those things, but you can pass a law that says, you're not allowed to bring a book by Ta-Nehisi Coates into the classroom, otherwise you might get fired.
Although, did you see this news about Peanuts the squirrel? And finally, Republicans are standing up to police brutality. Do you feel like that's progress?
I love animals, and I'm very sad about Peanut the squirrel, but I really wish that the people who are very angry about Peanut the squirrel could extend some of that empathy for, someone like Tamir Rice, who gets killed by the police.
I don't know if you know this. Tomorrow's election day. Everyone I know has been anxious. Yeah, you gotta watch the news, man.
I'm not paying attention.
You gotta pay. That's why I think they need to extend it. They need to be running for president for longer than what they've been, because informed people like you have no idea it's happening.
At least 2.5 years of election.
3, 4.
What's bad is that's sort of what we have now. It's pretty awful.
Yeah, I think Trump has been running for over 700 days for President of the United States.
I thought you were going to say years, to be honest.
Feels like that. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else knows either. If people are telling you that they know, I think they're not telling you the truth. You have the polling, which is pointing towards a very tight race, and you have non-polling indicators that are saying maybe there's a bit more of an advantage for Harris. But the fact is, people are trying to read tea leaves from the early vote, and that doesn't really work. The truth is, we're not going to know what's going to happen until it happens. And most of the things that we are seeing right now point towards a very close race where it could go either way. Even if that map ends up looking very red or very blue, it's going to be, it's not going to be by a whole lot of votes, if that makes any sense. Unfortunately, the way the Electoral College works is a few votes in a few states can swing the thing one way or the other.
Yeah, so who knows, but if you don't live in 7 states, it doesn't matter what you do.
Unfortunately not.
America, baby. Check out Adam's piece of the November issue of The Atlantic, and The Cruelty Is the Point is available now. Adam Serwer.